This is House Planning Help, episode 208. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up, it's a solo session about my own project. I'm having a think about why our tender returns were so high, and Kay and I also go through our value engineering spreadsheet and consider the savings that we could make and also those that we're not prepared to make. Quick recap though, it probably makes sense to check back to episode 207 in that we receive our tender returns and get a bit of a shock because our budget was 400,000 and our tender returns have come back in between 612,000 and the highest one was 885,000. And what I really liked about that one is how it went into decimal places of 23p at the end. So we've got all of those and we need to decide on our next steps. If I'm honest, I'm a little bit upset because I know that we've got a good form to the building. It's masonry, so it should be cost effective. And I'm hoping, like Nick Grant suggested in episode 111, that we've done a lot of our value engineering up front. That's what makes life so much simpler. So go back and check that out if you want a really good episode on value engineering. So we have to move on, and Dan Higginbotham, who we chatted to in episode 205 from Parsons and Whitley, he's also just helped me with a couple of facts as we go through this, because I've tried to think about why we might have got these high returns. And some of this is going to be embarrassing for me, but we're going to do it anyway. So let's start with a few of the factors outside our control. And one of those, I think the obvious one, is the market, that it's changing. It's hard to pin down exactly why it's changing. I guess the market is always changing. Maybe I would say Brexit. I'm certainly not a fan of everything that's going on with Brexit, but that could be responsible. It might be nothing to do with it. Who knows? But Dan was giving me a couple of examples of how masonry products, certain products he's seen, because they do all sorts of projects, a lift of between 12 and 20% in recent times. Things like lintels. In the interview I did with him, he mentioned the PIR insulation and how there was a worldwide shortage. He's also talked about on certain projects that they've done recently, they've noticed that wages have also increased by 3 to 5%. So that is the first factor, I think, that maybe we don't know exactly what has changed in the market, but something has changed. And actually, when those figures were revealed, just before we got into that section, Chris had talked about how they've had a lot of returns that have come back and they've been big shocks recently, and that's perhaps why ours was a big shock too. Now, also remembering that Parsons and Whitley are based in Swaffham, which is not exactly next door to us, although they do projects that come very close to us. That's where their base is, and I guess a lot of their projects are in Norfolk. We're in Hertfordshire, which is a home county. And if you think about London, that's as expensive as it gets in the UK. And then the next expensive places are places like Surrey and Hertfordshire. The prices are just expensive. And I always get embarrassed when I talk about numbers for the project because they are so expensive here. And I know if we sold and moved somewhere, perhaps even to Norfolk, to Scotland, our money would go that much further. So there is a Hertfordshire price, I think, at work here, and that means that certain things are more. And Dan even just mentioned simple things. I don't know what this was exactly in relation to, but let's say this might be a road closure, that doing it in Hertfordshire is quite a bit more expensive than doing it in Norfolk. So very interesting to see that. Another aspect that we are certainly responsible for is the specification. Now, you might remember a few moments ago I was saying how we've got a good form, we're a masonry build, it should be cost effective, we've got all the skills in this country. Well, yes, but we've also got clients who've gone crazy on the specification. For me, building a passive house was important, and actually, to some degree, I'm not fussed whether it's a traditional looking one or contemporary. You know, I hope I build a contemporary house in the future. But for Kay, it was really important that our house be quite traditional in influence and materials. And that's why we've gone for handmade bricks on our plinth. We've gone for handmade roof tiles. And you probably just know whenever you see the word handmade, that's not a good sign for cost. We've got lime render, so that requires a little bit of special skill. Perhaps actually the thickness of lime render that we want is a lot thicker than some people might choose, but that's to get a certain effect. So things like this are already shaping the project, and that's on the outside. Then we move into the inside and we look at, say, the flooring, which is a recycled wood that's been made somehow into engineered wood. And again, recycled actually is not a good word to relate to cost. We've got 4 bathrooms and a toilet as well. And I look at that every so often and think, well, should we really have 3 bathrooms and 1 toilet? But it's almost too late into the process and we've committed ourselves. I suppose there is a conversation that could be had, but at the time that seemed quite sensible. Looking at it now, perhaps we were going over the top there. So specification, definitely a key component in why our prices were high. Working with an interior designer is an interesting one because I think there is opportunity for you to save money and also to create things that are going to cost you a fortune. And we've probably done both. The kitchen, we're using pretty standard units. You can spend lots on kitchens, and I don't think we've gone crazy. Perhaps our surface for the kitchen tops is fairly expensive, but we've improvised. And so I'm hoping that overall, actually, the cost of our kitchen is pretty good. However, on the downside, say, for example, there is a section of the kitchen where we've got some, handmade has come up again, handmade tiles that are going to add a lot of value, but they're funny shaped tiles, they are handmade, they are a lot more expensive. So originally, if Parsons and Whitley had been doing one of their other projects for this area in the kitchen, they might allow, say, £25 per square metre. And these lovely, we're only doing 3 square meters of this. Don't judge me too much, but we are using ones that are £185 per square meter. So as I mentioned, it swings and roundabouts. This whole value engineering thing, though, you've got to make the decisions, haven't you? What are we going to keep? What are we not going to keep? This is a very important one too, and that is our expanded footprint. I suppose I should rewind to when we started out. So we bought this piece of land that had a very, very big house on it. That's permission for a very, very big house. And we reduced that, I'm pretty sure, over half. It could even be down to a third, but I can't remember the details. And then I suppose when I did all my calculations, the land equation, the land cost plus the build cost plus 20 to 30% profit is less than the value of the house. We did all of that. But I maybe did it too roughly and I got carried away thinking, oh, £2,000 a square metre, that'll get us anything that we want because it's a high specification. So there were some errors in here that perhaps I'd just been doing that calculation for 200 square metres when in actual fact over time our building increased to 226. Now this was in that knowledge that we were going to be paying more, but perhaps at the back of my mind I was hoping, oh, well, maybe it'll all be okay. We'll increase it. And because we're not building any more rooms, we're just having a little bit more space around us. It won't increase it that much. And this is probably the stupidest one for me, that I really didn't think about a garage. Oh, a garage is not going to cost any more. It's a garage. It's not a house. 28 square meters. And really, okay, if we're saying £2,000 a square meter, well, the garage still has finishes on the outside, but not on the inside. So maybe you're talking around about £1,700 a square metre. Yeah, so not accounting for that is pretty stupid and a reason why the cost will escalate. And here's another one relating to that original consent for the house. That had to be dug down by ½ a metre to have the 2 stories. And we thought we might be able to do away with that, but it actually turned out we just couldn't move the house far enough away because we've got this issue with the greenbelt that we are just able to build on a very small area of our overall ½ acre plot, which means, yes, we had to dig down ½ a metre. And I'd seen on other sites where you just spread that across the site, but actually it wasn't as straightforward as that. There was the knock-on effect, and that meant that we had to ship it off site in the end. The spoil was taken away and that cost just under 10 grand. So you can see all of these things at the time, they don't seem, ½ a metre down. That's not going to make a difference, is it? But yeah, it adds up. Here's another one that actually Dan came up with this one. I think he's exactly right. The word passive house can add expense to people that haven't done it before. And that's understandable, isn't it? If you do something new, there's a risk factor. You don't want to end up losing lots of money. So perhaps you charge more because of that risk factor. And there are things that you do on a passive house project that maybe you don't do on a normal one. You take a lot more care. There's lots of taping going on for the air tightness or the penetrations. You have to be very careful about those. So I understand that. What was strange to me was that the people that I brought on board because of their passive house experience, I thought, oh, well, that's going to mean that the quotes will be competitive. But I think there are a couple of things going on here that might be confusing that. It'd be really interesting if they were local people to see what their quotes and tender prices would have been. However, although they work in our area, they are actually not local. And I suppose they have to account for some hotel stays, some travel expenses. Looking for local labour might take a bit of time. And we noticed that their labour costs were between double and 3 times that of the lowest contractor, who is a local contractor. So although putting these people with passive house experience who knew what this project was all about, the tender returns came back higher, it could have been distorted a little bit in that. Hopefully you follow me there. And then this is another really interesting point, that the prices themselves will actually vary over time. And you can't design a house in 24 hours and there we go, we know how much it's going to cost. It just takes time. You've got planning, you've got specification, and so it's pretty much a year down the road when you actually come to go out to tender. Or in our case anyway, it was a year down the road. So Chris and the team were able to show me a similar scheme to ours in size and quality of build that had been built a year earlier for £400,000. So I guess that experience with them might have given them confidence that our project could be built for a similar sum. So there are all sorts of things going on there. What do we do next? Well, Kay and I sit down together. It's late, the kids have gone to bed, we are exhausted. I apologise if there's a yawn or two in this, but we're going to look at value engineering, and Kay explains what we've got to do.
Well, in this spreadsheet, Dan has listed everything that we can make a potential saving on. So the total is showing all of the potential savings. And then I've made a few changes. So I haven't deleted anything, I've moved them to the bottom. So you can see what we've taken out. These are the things we want to keep. So the porch dwarf walls, he has said if we omit them, but retain and install the foundations for future installation, then we could save ourselves £6,400. So, you know, we just have to spend that money further down the line and then we wouldn't get the VAT back. He said omit the porch oak frame, which is worth £3,800. The soffits, 120, the roof tiles and coverings, 400, the ridge tiles, £24.96. We could omit the inlet hopper to the rainwater downpipes because it's not a heavily treed area. So we can lose that, and that saves us £600.
What does that even mean, though?
I think it's...
treed area?
Yeah, it's an inlet hopper on the downpipes. Yeah. So I think it's to stop leaves from clogging up your drain pipes. But because we're not in a wooded area, heavily wooded area, we're not going to have that many leaves falling into the gutter that requires a hopper. So that saves us £600. The balcony oak frame and glazed guarding, I've said if we change it to oak spindle guarding instead of the glazed one, what would that cost be?
And what about just switching it back to how we had it originally, this balcony?
That's
and size.
Well, I'm not changing the size. He hasn't given us a cost saving for that. He's just basically said if you omit the whole balcony. The roof light blind upstairs in the landing, that could save us £340. Do we really need a blind on the roof light?
No, can't see why.
There are doors on all the bedrooms, so they're not going to shine into anyone's bedrooms.
It's on the north side of the building as well, so it shouldn't have any overheating issues.
So that's something we can get rid of and save ourselves £340. The garage door, if we changed it from timber to steel and changed from Horman to Garab door, then that could save us £700. Plus the strip lighting. We could get rid of the strip lighting, that saves us £300.
What's strip lighting?
It's just lighting along the garage door.
Oh, okay.
Garage door battery backup. If we didn't have the battery backup and just had a manual release, that would save us £250. The one thing I did keep, though, was garage door auto operators. We want an automatic opener. We don't want a manual opening. We don't have to keep going out of the car to open and close the garage door.
We'll just never open the door if that's the case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's £800, which is quite a lot. I didn't think it was that much. I could have sworn Horman said that it was only like another £200. So we'll have to look into that. Garage door, air pressure testing. If we use the alternative to Paul, we'd save £500. So I think it's worth going back to Paul and saying, look, they could do it for this much. Can you match it? The mirrored internal doors to the dressing room. Now, these are the sliding doors with the mirror. And he has said if we changed from a mirrored door to just an ordinary timber door and got rid of the sliding doors and changed it to just an ordinary hinge door, then potentially we could save sort of £800. But I've been online and found a much cheaper sliding door anyway.
Things like sliding doors you want to work. You don't want to have it installed and then have constant hassle with it.
Well, we have to go and have a look at these things. So, yeah, I've put that quote in. So that still saves us £430 based on the original quote of £735 if we go with the cheaper door. Bespoke shelving in the storage units, he's saying just omit them all together and save £10,000. We are getting a new quote with Gabby's joiner, so I want to see what
shelving
that comes in.
Where's this?
It's all the bespoke shelving that Gabby designed. The bookshelf and the TV media unit in the snug, the media unit in the living room, the bookcase and the seating unit on the landing, and the boot room, bench and storage. But
the fact that we've had this designed, I would like to follow through if we possibly can.
Well, if you don't have it, you're going to have to buy furniture.
Yeah, it would probably be cheaper, but
it wouldn't be that much cheaper. You'd be amazed how expensive they are. And I was reading an article saying that it does actually add to the appeal of a house to a future buyer to have built-in shelving and, you know, things that's bespoke to the house. But that's only a PC sum, the 10,000. So no, it's not. That's what Mark's quoted. So I've given the specific drawings to another joiner to see what he says. He has said if we found an alternative manufacturer to Howden's, for example, Rixon Way, we could save ourselves around £5,000 in the kitchen and the utility. I'm looking at getting alternative quotes for the granite because I think we could certainly get the granite cheaper, and I will look into the kitchen appliances and see if we can get those a bit cheaper.
Okay.
I think there are things in the kitchen price that we could reduce. I think if we got the granite from a granite specialist, we'd cut out the middleman and get that cheaper. The only reason that
Can we do that though?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got builders in putting our kitchen in. We don't need the kitchen company to do it. So I think there are savings we could make in that without changing the whole kitchen. The staircase, he said alternative for MDF and then clad it with engineered oak. And that would save us over £4,000. I'm not entirely comfortable about changing the staircase. The water softener, he said, omit. We live in an incredibly hard water area. I think I would rather keep the water softener.
Okay.
And also, that would lengthen the life of all of our water appliances. And again, he said, get rid of the bioethanol fire.
Yeah,
would save
good suggestion.
£1,000. No, that's not happening. Sanitary fixtures and fittings. He said, reduce the PC sum at risk from 10,000 to 6,000. I've no idea how much our bathroom's going to cost, but that's something we could work towards. Now we know we're over budget, we could work towards keeping our sanitary ware under the PC sum.
I think we'll find that difficult.
I've no idea how much it's going to cost.
Unless you're going for budget bathrooms.
Internal and external light fittings, again, we could look at reducing it from 5,000 to 3,000. 3,000 doesn't sound an awful lot for all of our light fittings. The doorbell, he's saying we could omit a stainless steel doorbell in lieu of black plastic. That would save £260.
It's just so difficult to know how much these things will impact on the building. it is just a doorbell.
Yeah.
Or we could get people to knock.
Yeah. The flooring, he said if we look at an alternative supplier, for example, the one that he's quoted from Reeve Wood, then we could save £3,000 on upstairs and £2,400 downstairs. But is it the sort of wood that we want? But I am looking into alternative flooring suppliers, but I don't think we'd save that much and still have a decent quality of wood. MDF panelling, you're saying omit it. I don't understand what the MDF panelling is.
That's for the back hall where we were having that and then
the
painting
tongue and
over it or
groove.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, that's £1,200.
Again, I think that this is what we've had specially designed.
Yeah. Omit the oak gate posts, save £340. Omit the access gates, £1,240. We need a gate.
Why do we need a gate? Might need a gate in time, but that's right down at the other end of the property. We're not going to want to open and close it every time we come home.
True. Yeah, okay, so that could be something that we can get rid of. It's
We could just say
£1,500.
that's a postpone, perhaps.
Yeah. The post and rail fencing, you're saying if we omit the special heavy fencing in lieu of standard post and rail, then we could save ourselves £1,200.
Say that again, the heavy fencing.
Yeah, special heavy fencing and just have a standard post and rail fence. Then that would save £1,200, but I'd need to see that. I'm not sure what the difference is. Hit and miss fencing. You're saying if we omit that in lieu of a standard closed board fencing? No. Closed board fencing is the fence that we absolutely hate. For the sake of £2,000. And the driveway, if we change resin to gravel, then that saves us £22,000.
At least that one is a big figure.
Yeah. And the terrace paving, if we find an alternative supplier of the stone, that could save us up to £1,500. And then he's reduced our contingency, which is already quite low, down to 15. Then the other cost considerations are reducing our overall size of the house by 1 metre, would save us 25 grand. Or the cost alternative to getting rid of the porch altogether is to get an oak frame porch kit ready-made. And that would save us £1,300. The roof tiles, which I'd rather change anyway, from William Blythe to Lifestyles, would save us £1,000. The rainwater goods, we could change them from aluminium to plastic. That would save us £1,100. But is that short-sighted because aluminium would last longer? And the terrace and paving, you said if we reduce the overall area by 25 square metres, that could save us £3,500. But I said, we don't want to omit the front terrace. What about if we take out the back terrace? He said, that's 12.5 square metres. So that would save us about £1,500. But that's something we could easily get rid of. So overall, he got it down to something like £480,000.
That is amazing, though.
But that's taking out porches, balconies, changing driveway materials, changing the fencing, changing sleeper retaining walls, changing quite a lot. So what I was trying to do was just taking out anything that we don't want to lose and seeing what this figure comes to. And so far it's coming to 509 now.
That figure did, in fact, creep up again. It's funny how you reduce things and then you find yourself looking again and perhaps adding a few back in. So it's a really difficult thing to do. I know that that was not a comprehensive list that we've gone through, Kay and I. That was just the ones that we wanted to talk about together. A key factor that a lot of people end up going with is just reducing the size of the house. That makes sense, doesn't it? If you have a smaller floor area, we started out with our calculations of it'll be £2,000 a square metre, fewer square metres of floor area. So you can see how that will easily get things back on track. There's a flip side though, and I'm sure if you end up in this situation, you will have a bit of heartache here. You'll be tugged in different directions. There is the obvious emotional side, first of all, and maybe just in your position, you won't be allowed or afforded the opportunity to think about this too much, but you've designed your dream home and you really want to follow it through if you possibly can. You don't want to start changing things, but If you're absolutely up against the wall, which I have to say we are not, we can afford to pay more, we're going to pay more. And the key reason I think behind that is the value of the house. That is the finished value. We've got to be careful here. We've invested a lot into the project. And if you're someone who thinks, oh, you shouldn't worry about the resale value of your house, I suggest you go back into the archive and listen to our podcast with Mike Coe. That's episode 152, all about the resale value, because he built an amazing house that really he managed to eliminate the heating system. And unfortunately, the value of it on the market, it just didn't reflect the work that had gone into it. So I'm trying to keep the value all okay, and I'm concerned that if the rooms, you could take out a bit of space, we could probably have exactly the same rooms. But if it starts to get too pokey, I think you could actually wipe off a lot of value. So if we can invest that now while we're building, we want to go ahead and we can do that. Obviously, I don't know how this story will finish. It's still unfolding before us, but that's the great thing. Just keep on listening to this podcast. Maybe by the end of it, I will have changed my mind. Finally, today, I wanted to talk about the lowest bid mentality, because we are in talks with the contractor who has put forward the lowest bid. And there is a danger here, isn't there, that actually that can be a tactic sometimes to win the contract. You put in a really low bid, and then later that contractor finds ways of clawing back as much money as they possibly can. Or maybe they take a hit because they have underestimated some of the work involved. So there's a risk, isn't there, going with the lowest bid. However, the few points I wanted to make here is, number one, it's not cheap. The lowest bid is not cheap at all. Also, we've worked quite hard to vet everyone who was in this process, which I think must be important too. And finally, I'm very pleased about this, that our lowest bid was highly recommended. Whereas one of the other local contractors who didn't really come from a recommendation, well, their return arrived late and had to be disqualified. And there were some warning signs in the run-up that perhaps they wouldn't be someone that we'd want to hire. I think we found it very difficult just to get them to pick up a phone, all of those sorts of things. So I think there's a podcast in here, isn't there, about the lowest bid mentality. I'm sure we need to, in future, dig into design and build as well and see how things would roll and the pros and cons of doing it the other way around. But I hope you've enjoyed that episode today. It feels good to get it all off my chest. If you want to reflect on what I've talked about, houseplanninghelp.com/208. I'd also like your input. Sometimes you can see it from a completely different angle. Is there anything that I've missed out in my analysis of why our tender returns were so high? Or perhaps you're building stuff at the moment and you've got experience and you think, well, things are changing at the moment because of this. Well, you can leave a comment at the bottom of the show notes, houseplanninghelp.com/208. Just a couple of things to finish up on. Firstly, an iTunes review. Thank you very much to Jensen Stanford from the US, who says this podcast introduced me to Passive House. That alone has made it an invaluable educational resource as I'm working on my own self-build. Good luck with it, Jensen. And thank you very much. I apologise. We had to make a decision a while ago to focus this podcast on the UK market because it just got too complicated. And I always feel bad because I can see that half of our audience still comes from the US. So you do well. If you're listening in the States at the moment, thank you very much for hanging on in there. If you haven't written us an iTunes review, it's something we perhaps should talk about a little bit more because it does have a great impact on bringing new people in. A review goes up and actually we find the figures take a big jump. So if you can write us one next time you're in the iTunes store or however else you're listening to it, they normally have some way of reviewing the podcast. It would be much appreciated. And then finally, a hub update. We've got another chapter of our Buckinghamshire Passive House story. This is our in-depth video case studies that we have for our hub members. And this one sees Gordon Lewis, who's been on the podcast before, blowing the insulation into the cavities of this timber frame PH15 build. So he goes in depth about exactly what he does when he turns up. We look at all the equipment. It's a really good video, if I don't say so myself. We also have our progress call taking place any moment for this month, and we've got a special guest, self-builder John Fennick. His project won an award, didn't it? Tyne Croit, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's lovely, it's contemporary, but it does draw on the local vernacular up in the Highlands there, so really looking forward to that with our hub members, just quizzing him on certain aspects. I know what my questions will be about. It'll be about that L shape, because it's an L-shaped passive house, which of course, whenever you start out, like you can see with my project, I've gone for a fairly simple form, while they had the choice. John is a technical man. I think he understands these things. He went into this with his eyes open, so I look forward to finding out more about that on the progress call. And we've got all the regular stuff, the courses, the forum you can get amongst like-minded people. So if you're building an eco home in the UK, we'd love you to become a member. Check it out, houseplanninghelp.com/join. Next time, Tony Godwin from FCD Architecture is my guest, and he gives us the backstory of his self-build near Rutland Water. Thanks for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.